AI for Exponential Businesses is the unique fair opportunity for young generation to learn from high technology achievers at a global scale. Our aim is educating about trust technology and AI opportunity. In this series, we invite AI researchers and practitioners with exponential AI journey dedicated to build technology for millions of customers and users. And particularly in this episode, from Seattle, we fly to California, meeting Dr. Mohak Shah, Vice President and AI Machine Learning at LG Electronics. Please help me welcome in this episode Mohak. Hi, Mohak.
Hi, Lubna. Thanks for having me. Glad to hear.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. How about you?
Very nice. So I'm really pleased to have you in this with us in AI Exponential Thinking. And thank you for joining this discussion in this episode about AI for exponential business. So we will address many topics in these discussions, but before all of this, and we know after 2 decades experience either in AI, digital transformation, technology in Silicon Valley, my question is, what's the funniest thing that happened in your professional career? I know that maybe there's a lot, right? But at least one to share with our young audience today.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there are a lot. Let me think. So here's the thing. One of the interesting things, in fact, it's both funny and in some way it's instructional, is I learned the importance and sort of prevalence of meme culture, I guess, in the organizations. And what it then does is when you propose ideas and after some time those ideas are kind of coming back to you. So essentially I would give an idea to someone, that idea floats around in the organization, and then it comes back to you as sometimes your idea is some, and more often than not somebody else's idea, right? And during the process you learn, like you, when we were kids, you used to play this phone game, right? You would have like this like information distortion that happens every time, and you start learning at this meme culture. I had like a bunch of experience where these ideas would come back to me, and I'm like, wow, this is quite interesting. The idea looks familiar, but that's not exactly what I said, right? So something happened somewhere. But you started enjoying like the meme culture, right? So the first reaction when you are kind of just joining the workforce is, yeah, how come somebody else is taking credit for my idea? But I think the more fun part of it is it kind of validates your idea. It basically tells you that there is merit to it. Somebody really feels that this idea is worth kind of passing out, and as it kind of circulates around, it also builds acceptance. So it's sort of a fun that way. But then on the fun side, you can always play around with it. You can experiment with it, right? So one of those meme cultures, for example, I just floated around some idea about like some random term that I would just coin. Things like robotic Watson. It may or may not mean anything, but hey, I mean, let's just see, if it really comes back to me. And sure enough, you just give it enough time and it comes back to you. So it's an amazing experience to kind of see how ideas kind of float around. But importantly, it kind of also tells us how technology and science progresses. Right? It's basically very cumulative in nature, right? And everybody kind of, it's not just kind of taking the idea and running with it, but adding what they know about it. Sometimes, when the idea comes back to me, I'm kind of, I'm both excited and surprised that there are certain new things that you learn about it, right? And certain new dimensions that you never thought about it. So it's an interesting experience altogether.
It's resonate with me too much what you are saying. Especially from one domain, from one industry to another, and from one company to another, you see too much about this, what you talk about, the culture, you name it, culture, and how
Right.
people perceive things as well.
Yeah.
And there's always like at least for the beginning of any relationship with the company and the people in the company, there's sometimes you need this time in order to sit, to define and clarify the context, and try to understand both the sides, I mean the side of technology, but also the side of expertise of those people as well. And
Absolutely.
sometimes you're right, sometimes you discuss, but there's a gap, but after sometimes we understand, and maybe there's a lot of sense that we can exploit it in some way for the benefit of the company. But it's definitely something that we needed because it enhanced the experience of both of us by finally at the end, right?
It absolutely does, right? I mean, everybody is coming from sort of a different background, different experience. So, as a technologist, for example, I push an idea. I have relatively limited understanding, or even like limited view of the constraints of domains and businesses and how they are operating, right? So, in my own world, I am like giving this amazing idea, and I feel like this is going to change the world. It comes back to you, and you start realizing, hey, these are X, Y, and Z reasons why I can't even put it in practice. I mean, let alone it changing the world. So let me just dial back, understand the context, and you start kind of appreciating that context more and more.
Right. So, Mohak, you are an executive technologist. You are also a researcher, associate professor. You write also a book of Cambridge, from Cambridge Press, with more than 2 decades AI experience in large corporates such as Bosch, but also LG Electronics and others. We are really curious to know more about your personal journey to achieve this incredible career, but especially, was it a dream at the beginning?
Uh, I would like to say yes, Lobna, but that won't be true. So, just, just like all of us, right? I mean, our journeys are, I believe, at least in my opinion, our journeys are sort of a combination of our interests, our passions, and more importantly, circumstances. I think, whether we call it circumstances, luck, what happens at any given point in time, whether at personal level or macro level, it all plays in a role in it, right? I mean, and it's kind of like the latter part, the circumstantial part is relatively underrated. In some cases, you you kind of are pushed into something because, hey, this is what's happening. So I'll give you an example, right? When I was growing up in India, I'm originally from India, right? So I was growing up there. If you are coming from sort of the background that I was, there were sort of two fundamental directions in which you can go for a viable career. So if you are kind of pursuing arts or pursuing sort of some of like those soft areas,
Yeah.
there were relatively limited opportunities, right? I mean, to essentially move up the chain. So the default was, okay, go do math or go do biology, right? I mean, become a doctor or an engineer. That's essentially how very broadly the world essentially used to view it. So we were like, fine. I mean, and thankfully, math was something that I really enjoyed. Uh, Medical was another thing that I enjoyed, and I got kind of fortunate to work in a field that would bring both of those sides together a little bit later in the time. But we started with math, and I was like, yeah, fine. This is going on. Computer science was sort of a new phenomena. This was like growing at that time,
Yeah.
and it was both exciting and sort of both kind of amusing to see how quickly it was changing the world around us. So I entered that, and as part of my kind of final year, I got around to this whole notion of neural networks back then. Actually, so it was less machine learning, and there was like more neural networks because this was sort of mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
And late 90s, it was neural networks were a thing then, right? And the mid to late 90s, that was sort of one of like the high periods of neural networks, and we started learning about that, and that got me interested in this broader area of machine learning. And the original interest was purely kind of intellectual, that I just want to learn this because, hey, how can machine learn? How do they really kind of do things that we do? And it sounded very exciting, right?
Yeah.
So I started doing that, talked to sort of a bunch of professors, and that's just, while I was back in India, I started kind of communicating with professors, looking at their research works, and ended up kind of meeting who would be my supervisor after that, like in back in Canada. And we started discussing the ideas and sort of got excited about the theories that he was developing. And as a part of our kind of interaction, we figured, hey, how would I just kind of pursue my master's over there and see how it goes? Start doing this master's, gradually move to the PhD program, because once you kind of get into that, you start realizing that, hey, I need to put way much more time into this to be able
Yeah.
to go to the depth. And of course, I mean, that was exciting period in the sense that it was nascent period of machine learning from a adoption perspective. So those days we were still working on sort of cool math. The top conferences in machine learning that invite, I don't know, thousands of people now, used to be like 500 people, right? It would be like very intimate discussion. I would go to like some theoretical machine learning conferences. So these were like math oriented conference, and then you would have maybe like 100 people. It was very core set of people that would just understand what was going on. And then you start looking at like this proliferation of machine learning in all aspects of the life for whatever, like a combination of reasons. We started getting more data. Whatever it started with like the medical field, but then we started getting like social media data, big data, and then there was like all this data that would be captured by all the sensing devices. There were like more improvements in communication technologies. So that was sort of a natural progression, essentially, rather than me making conscious choices. It was just like you happen to be in a field that is growing, it's making bigger impact, and you are at a stage where you see this field going all the way from very niche theoretical applications to some very targeted applications, all the way to where we see today. In fact, it's becoming something where it's part of almost everything that we interact with, consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously. So it's been an interesting journey, and thankfully I was sort of also fortunate to be able to work with very smart people, and that was just pure chance, that you end up with the people that you get to learn so much from, both in terms of not just machine learning or AI, but broadly in terms of how kind of it correlates with sort of the social issues and everything else. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey since then.
And how you find yourself after that in corporate, from the PhD, let's say, to the corporate, and the transition between both of them. It's a story,
Right.
I guess.
That's always interesting, right? I mean, from two perspectives, I guess. And I don't really want to kind of side with one versus the other. It's just sort of relatively different in nature, but overlapping. So academia, it was, and again, I mean, even after PhD, I was sort of research fellow back at McGill. We were doing some interesting things around, medical imaging. Before that, I used to work
Yeah.
on machine learning in HIV context, for example, understanding that. So it was sort of more of a journey where we were targeting open problems, very, very challenging problems. And it was sort of a broader community effort where you would start looking uh, at the kind of depth of the problem. You start realizing how immense these challenges are, and start making like piecemeal contributions to move forward in that area. And that is something that I still really like, because it gives you sort of the independence to look at the methodologies, not really bound by like a particular a frame of reference, for instance, right? So it's been like quite interesting that way. Then you start looking at the adoption aspect of it, and as you start, so I used to work for like this small startup back then, and then essentially moved to the corporate side of it, and you start looking at the execution pieces. The realization that you start getting is there are a whole lot of practical constraints that come into play now, right? So if just think of how you would get into sort of policy making. So let's say you are learning about social sciences, you are learning about, hey, these are like the financial policies, these are kind of like the I'm learning like the economic theory and everything. As soon as you get to apply it to real world, it changes, or your thought process starts evolving in a very different way, because it's not that straightforward cut and dry application of something, right? It impacts so many things, so many people in so many different ways.
Yeah.
You get exactly the same experience with technology, that hey, I can't really go in and apply, let's say, X algorithm, because you are applying it in a regulated industry. And if you're applying that, I need to make sure that my models are traceable. I can audit these models, they can be certified. And that then means that, hey, I may not be able to apply latest and greatest, but I need to apply tried and tested. I need to be able to know what these models are doing before I can actually put them on the field. So there are like all these experiences that makes you understand like the constraints. On the flip side, a big kind of push happens on the application side. So you get like, the technology takes a little bit of backseat, application really comes front. Uh, so since then, I think my challenge has been to try and kind of balance the two. I mean, because the technology still excites me. The application excites me even more, given how this technology has been impacting our world very, very quickly, very rapidly, and in so many ways, and not all necessarily sort of positive, I guess.
Yeah, there's technology has a lot of perspective, and we need to see it from different perspective in order to help people adopt it and take the most benefit from it.
Absolutely.
So the next topic is much more. We want to learn more about your perspective as a mentor, but also as a coach. So in AI Exponential Thinker, we believe that creativity and critical thinking are crucial skills for solving complex problems and offering the best experience for customers and users for the society. As a mentor, what are your advices and tips for young people to gain the best technology opportunity today?
That's a very good question, Lobna. I think lately how we have kind of pursued uh, building up our skills to some extent because of how quickly or like how widely these opportunities are available, we tend to kind of get gravitated by uh, any particular set of skills that relevant at any given point of time. So I'll give you an example, right? For example, if you are doing AI right now,
Mhm.
everything or like a big chunk of it is all around deep learning, right? I mean, if you're not doing deep learning, you're just not doing AI, so to speak. And that's essentially how the world is perceived. But again, this is an epoch in the broader journey of how we have been kind of looking at these technologies. So what I always suggest is, make sure that your fundamentals are strong. Make sure, you understand why something works. Uh, if I really just focus on a specific programming language, so think of, your Y2K years. Remember those years, and COBOL was a craze, and you got to kind of learn something because hey, everybody is demanding Y2K, which is like like engineers that can help them kind of work with all these Y2K challenges and whatnot.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I think that was sort of one thing that was very relevant for like a very few years, and then you start kind of growing to the next set of technologies, next set of capabilities. Fundamentally, I think you still, if you have the fundamentals of programming, for instance, or if you have fundamentals of underlying math, you are much better off. I mean, it's much easier to pick the skills, but it's much more difficult to pick the fundamentals. So if you're sort of growing up in your career, that is my core advice. If I were to be able to go back, I think I would add like a mathematics degree to my computer science degree. That hey, those
Okay.
were some of the things you would really enjoy doing, and those were like the challenges I enjoyed solving at some point. So I think uh, it really helps, I mean, to understand, build the fundamentals and ask what before how. So what I mean by that is, take a step back and try to understand what is it that you are trying to do before picking up the tools, right? If I, just picking up a hammer doesn't really mean what is it that you are actually going to use it for. So I think those, like, just going back to understanding like very foundational aspects of whatever area you are in are sort of very crucial, because that forms the basis. Then the rest is sort of up for grabs. You can just pick it up.
Um, I'm really impressed by what you said, because generally the people who are, I'm saying generally because the idea is not to stereotype people, right?
Yeah.
But data scientists who are more have 2 years of just studying in data science I need those advices, I guess. And because the people who are coming from research by PhD know, I mean, they are more focusing on what you said. So they try to understand the fundament before how to
Yeah.
before the part of execution, let's say it in some way. Okay. But the data scientists that they follow a little bit courses and those things, they are more able to execute without understanding why, and without any stereotyping, but because at least for the first years of their experience, and then they go more deeply on understanding the fundament of the things and why and how and what and those questions. That's why generally I said there's a big difference of the perception of someone who did research compared to someone, no matter where, who did more, who is more performing as well in the technical aspect as execution. There's
Yeah.
a big difference.
There is, Lobna, and I think you're very right in the sense that the actually let me take a step back. I think what's happening is two things, right? The technology has run very quickly over at least like past decade or something, right? And if something runs that quickly, it results in kind of the implications that we see today. One being, hey, you have exceptional demand and our education system or our like broader society is not able to kind of meet that demand right now.
Yeah.
What that results in is sort of finding quick pathways to fulfilling that demand, uh, which is okay to some extent
Yeah.
if we, as a application folks, we know a specific piece that needs to be solved. Now what we are asking from folks is, hey, you come in and you solve like an end-to-end problem for me, and that is something that we are not training them for. So what's happening is, just as you said, right, like data scientist, if you take like let's say a few courses here and there, you build like the basic skill set, but the fundamentals are still something that you need to kind of work on, and that takes time, right?
It takes time.
Whether we put a label of PhD or not is sort of besides the point. Every time we talk about PhD or research is because ideally that should really build like that structural thought process in us,
True.
that
Exactly.
okay, let's just build the context around it. Let's not just like do things just for the sake of them, right? So I think that's, you're absolutely right, that context needs to be built and those questions need to be asked. And we have seen uh, folks who are sort of very well adapt with like a set of tools, but then when it comes to context, that's where we start seeing the problem. So I'll just give you like a very quick example on what it means. So we train like machine learning models, you get like data, and the best thing is, hey, I got like n number of data points. Let's say I got like 2000 data points, I build a model, and the idea is that based on this 2000 data points, the model that I built should work really well in real world. But if you don't really know about like the evaluation side of it, how do I really test these models, right? And I encounter this so often that we are building a model and you end up testing it on exactly the data that you built on. So what happens now is, you are just biasing your model. You don't really, you just assume that your world is entirely represented in the data set that you got. So for example, if I'm trying to understand like the health state of like 10 people, I build a model learning from those 10 people. But if the 11th person ends up being very different from those 10 people, my model is going to break down, because all I did was understand those 10 people and test my models on those 10 people. It works perfectly. But it doesn't really, give me like the kind of resiliency that I need in my model.
True.
So those are like the context that I see missing on so many different levels, not just like the people who are building models, but also sort of the organizations who are building systems, for example, right? And that's sort of part and parcel of how this technology has grown so fast that in some sense we are just trying to kind of play catch up while also making these technologies as widely available as possible. So I think this the search for equilibrium is going to kind of last for a little long before we can kind of settle in. But the importance is like very appreciated, or at least starting to get appreciated now, that the context has to be there.
Correct. Um, we have those advices from a mentorship perspective. Now, if we flip it and take it from coaching, for me, and at least for I think for everyone, coaching is a different way to empower people. And we are curious to know what's your perspective on coaching?
Right. So I think depending on how we define sort of coaching versus mentoring, I think uh, one is kind of more focused on very specific defined goal. So I can, for example, uh, you know, train someone to get like a skill set, and that would be like a very targeted kind of application of how you would help someone train. The second aspect is, okay, how do you really guide somebody, or like at least help them? I think it's those are like personal journeys, but at least help them do the discovery process, right? And what I mean by that is, when we talk about sort of purpose and sense in life, right? I mean, beyond sort of looking at something from a career perspective, how do you really start building a purpose? And I think that is where sort of more coaching, more mentoring are required, depending upon how we kind of use the term. But at the end of the day, I think I personally, uh, I kind of see coach as somebody who would provide like that broader perspective to people who can say, let's look beyond my immediate goals. Let's look beyond my quantifiable matrix and identify success.
Mhm.
So when we talk about success, for example, right, it's not like a the same definition for everybody. success would be something very different from me than somebody else, right? I mean, one person can define success as, I don't know, moving up the ladder in a very large organization. Or you might define success as, getting X million dollars, and that can be success to you.
Yeah.
But what I've seen is, that quantified metric of success may or may not give you purpose, may or may not give you sense of satisfaction, right? So that is something that it's for you to define. What is it that really makes you satisfied in life? So I kind of always ask this question, right? Every time we have the discussion with people, I always ask this question on what in your head is a life well lived, right? So how do you really measure your life? And there is like sort of interesting takes on it, right? If you look at uh, like some of like the recent writings, even from sort of some of the leading authors, and I
Yeah.
think we are as a society moving to this whole mindset that we need to be broadly examining what our purpose, what our sense are, and that really it's an evolving process. I think as we grow, as we get more context, we start realizing what are the kind of things that make us happy or make us content. And what I like to tell people is, especially if you're in like data science or something, it's an interesting exercise to do. Follow the data, right? Uh, what do you think that makes you happy versus what does make you happy in real life? I mean, those may not be the same thing. So my perception of happiness may not be the same thing as my experience of happiness. And those are very different. So broadly, I think, from that perspective, I think the guidance is always around nudging, somebody to be able to always look for that discovery process, not kind of, get yourself busy in very point skills at any given time. I think it's more important that let's broaden our perspective and see how we want to kind of situate ourselves in the broader societal context.
Great, you talk about the definition of success, and you're right. It's a very personal questions, and for sure the answer should be very personal. But unfortunately, today's, and especially I think for 100 years, not today, people don't define their own definition of success. They are just following another definition of success, and this is why they are losing the purpose of something that makes sense for them. And I think technology era is unfortunately go pushing people to go more in this way. That's why we talk about exponential thinker, because we are trying to say, okay, exponential technology is perfect, and we it's something that will bring a lot of opportunity solution for our lives. But at the same time, we need to take two step back, right? And think about other things with about society, the planet, the children, the life, in order to define success for everyone with authenticity. And hopefully we succeed one day to bring this civilization differently. So
Absolutely, I think, yeah, you're totally right.
we talk about mentoring and coaching. We talked a little bit about your journey, but now let's come back to your current role.
Yeah.
So as a technology executive, how looks a typical day in your current role, and what are the main challenges in such unique position and mission, especially?
Uh, that's interesting. Actually, it's sort of difficult to define a regular day. What I would say is, let's define what are kind of like the broader themes of what we do. And the reason I say that is, there are days when we are doing something very, very incremental, very, very kind of execution specific. There are other days that are much more satisfying where you start looking at kind of the broader context, broader problems, and what exactly are the impact of these
Yeah.
capabilities. I think the biggest challenge that we see, especially in sort of, and again, it's not like my current role or anything. This has been like a theme because we work with kind of what we like to call engineering heavy or legacy industries, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you are
Yeah.
talking in digital context, we are talking about companies that have come from sort of a very different background, like very engineering heavy, very domain kind of heavy organizations. So in a lot of sense, I think one of the challenges to be able to introduce new technologies like AI, and the biggest challenge that comes in the way is sort of bridging the gap between what business really needs versus what technology actually can do, and how do you really formulate, let's say, business problems in this technological context now. So for example, if I were to build let's say a robotic vacuum, for example, right?
Okay.
Now, if you're building a robotic vacuum, from a business perspective, you want to kind of build it so that it makes consumers' life easier. It just makes your life seamless. The integration has to be seamless. From a technological perspective, it's a very, very different challenge. It's not like I can say, hey, I have just one problem, that let's just train this robot, it just goes around everywhere in the house. But I have to start thinking of other things. Would it really cover everything? Would it be able to penetrate all the small spaces in my house? Would it be able to do it in a very short period of time?
Yeah.
Do I have to be mindful about how much energy it takes? Because that itself is like sort of
True.
a, right? So there are like all this kind of bridging that needs to happen on technology level. And then there are sort of this bridging that need to happen at much broader scaling level. So at some point, for example, when we were looking at the aviation industry, where back when I was at GE, we were looking at the aviation industry, and we started looking at sort of our CSA business. We started looking at, how do we uh, take this business and view it from a perspective where data and AI can help. So this is like, you are giving like warranties on your aircraft engines, and that would run for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
You need to be able to show that you make money out of it, you make profit out of it. But more importantly, your fleets are always in the sky, right? You want to make sure that, these are reliable, the operations don't really falter. So there is a whole lot that goes behind sort of your flying experience that all these industries are kind of putting together. And when you look at that, uh, it's not immediately clear on how you start solving that problem. If somebody says, hey, just apply data to it, I need to understand, okay, what problems are solvable, what are not. So that bridging of the gap is sort of a core part. And then there is the other theme that is a running theme around just pushing the state of the art on the technology. Because every time we do the business exercise, we learn that there are unaddressed things that we need to kind of solve now.
True.
In an interesting way, the journey has changed. So in my initial year, it was more around explaining sort of our leadership on what is feasible. So it was sort of, you built like a proof, like a proof point, and then you say, okay, you know what, look at this. This is what machine learning or AI or data science can do. I think it's been reversed now. I think our biggest challenge right now is to be able to tell what cannot be done, because the adoption has been like so vast
Yeah.
that in everybody's mind, AI is already there. It can just do a whole lot of things. And we have to kind of pull back a little to say, hey, these are the limits of the technology. Let's try to understand these can be done very, very faithfully, versus these are the things that we better be very careful before we just put it out in the market, I think. So it's an interesting journey, actually. And those are sort of like the running themes that we run across on sort of a more or less daily basis.
So every single, let's say, project or product, you have to go through many, many challenges, but
Ab-
they are part of the story, right? They're part of the process, and you have to deal with all of them, right? But my
yes.
question is, when you are like, you give an example, concrete example that help people to understand at least from some perspective. But in this example, generally, it's not easy as well to deal with the different, people who are leading those branches or those aspects or whatever. Why? Because everyone will defend his, targets. So
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
are in AI and especially in technology, let's say it like this, you need to cover all the perspective and find the consensus, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think so. This is interesting, right? I mean, if you look at AI, for example, just as a technology, by definition, it's an interdisciplinary technology to begin with, very interestingly, right?
Yeah.
So math is sort of a pure science. When we look at sort of anything sort of in the biology area, they tend to be relatively purer sciences. When we look at kind of AI or machine learning, to be sort of more precise in terms of where we are currently, uh, by definition, it's a mix of at least a few things. There are like a fundamental things that come from mathematics in terms of modeling. There are fundamental things that come from sort of computer science. There are fundamental things now that are coming in from engineering, for example, right? So by definition, there is that. Now you take this, and when you are like putting it in like a business context, you are dealing with a whole lot of stakeholders who
True.
are critical to getting this product out, right? So going with like my aviation example in the past, right?
Yeah.
We would talk to a whole lot of our colleagues in that would essentially monitor what's happening with like the flights on the plane. These are like engineers who have very deep experience and expertise in the physical modeling of these devices. So they understand like the underlying physics. Something goes wrong, they know what exactly to look for. And as an AI or machine learning person, I am kind of basically telling them that, hey, let me just abstract it all out. And without really kind of, looking at a specific set of values explicitly, I can tell you this is going to be a problem, or this is something that are the flights that are going to have an issue, for example. Can I really predict it? How do I go and build that confidence? Because they have to have very valid corroboration or substantiation of why I'm making that argument. And you start realizing that, okay, it's not just like a point game where I say, hey, I look at like my past data, I know that I can look at 97% of accuracy on this thing, but I can't really tell you why. But I can tell you that with high confidence, these are like good estimates. That doesn't necessarily float in that context, right? Then there are a whole lot of other folks who are apprehensive because the case has not as clear from sort of proving out the technology. So we have done quite a bit of work in building the technology, showing sort of the promise and everything else. But when it comes to spaces where they have certain ways of working, where these people have already operated in certain ways, you are challenging those ways. And then, to some extent, that onus goes on you to be able to say that, okay, this is why this replacement is better. So it's like, if I had been I've been kind of doing manual calculations all along, right? And somebody introduces a calculator to me. Why would I believe them? I mean, it does give me all the right answers, but like, how do I really believe it, right? So it's a function of both proving, and it takes time, I think. So adoption by definition is like a slow process, especially if you are impacting areas that have been around for a long, long time. If you are a native digital company, it's a very different thing. If your business model is all around this new technology, then you know that, okay, this is what our culture is. This is what, is really pushing it. And as the technology changes, I think even these organizations in say 15 years from now, 20 years from now, would be resistant to something new that might be coming. So it's a process, right? It's how we kind of learn, adopt, and essentially understand like the broader implications of these.
And I think it's not people, unfortunately, they understand the technology as only technology, but as you mentioned this example about calculation, it's same. Why you will believe on it, or at least accept it. So it's same. It's same between this example or a robot or a machine learning model that you will adopt it in one system, right? It's same. Probably it's more about the mindset than other things. And till now we didn't have the magic formula to upgrade the mindset in some perspective, let's say.
Absolutely. I think, it's also sort of, just as you said, mindset. It's sort of building this whole sort of data culture in the industries, right?
Yeah.
To be able to understand as well as appreciate that. And I think it's both kind of a challenge and responsibility to do it right, I think.
And one of our guests, she said, I remember her, she said that the data culture, as you said, and you are right, and especially the topic of data is not a fancy topic in company. So we need to go through this process for a couple times and years in order to settle it well, let's say it like this, in order to accelerate the digital transformation. We will come back to this topic later as well. So now let's move to, we talk about AI, now let's move to the AI ethics. And we call it in AI exponential thinker, trust technology. For us, technology, transparency, and trust should be together, and should be something very important that we care about it when we implement AI. As we work on building AI products and services for millions of users, from your perspective, how can we build